Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue. And Tom, man, I got to tell you, I'm excited for this week's show. We don't have to talk about releases. We don't have to talk about cutbacks. We can just talk some wrestling and keep it light this week and keep it positive. I've been looking forward to it all week. I'm ready to go.
It's very different from last week. Last week was heavy. I felt like after that Wednesday, I was just carrying it around with me for days. I was reaching out to people. I was saying to them how much I enjoyed this, how much I enjoyed that. I know there's a few people reaching out for interviews and stuff, but I sent messages out just saying, I really do wish you all the best. Hopefully from here on out, that's the end of the releases. So we will be able to get back to talking wrestling, and hopefully in the weeks to come, we'll be able to tell you where some of those people have landed.
Absolutely, and let's start with the in-ring talk. Let's go back a couple of days to last Friday on SmackDown, and we'll start there. And that's where we started to see the build really begin for this Braun Strowman versus the Fiend feud. Strowman's going to be defending the Universal Championship at Money in the Bank against Bray Wyatt. There's obviously backstory here between the two that they can build on. Obviously, their history in the Wyatt family, and that was really where Braun made his debut, was coming in as an ally of Bray Wyatt at the time, etc., etc. But do you feel like it's too soon to be going with this feud, especially so early on in Braun's title run?
I really do. It's a very difficult position to put him in when you put him against probably the most popular superstar right now in all of wrestling. Bray Wyatt has continued to defy expectations in all walks of life, and he continues to be that tremendous draw, that tremendous charisma, and he continues to really produce. Braun Strowman's only just got the title after many times trying, and he's in a very precarious position from this.
Now, obviously, Strowman won the title at WrestleMania, but obviously he was not the plan going in. That was not his spot until everything with Roman Reigns went down and COVID-19 and all of that. So with that in mind, do you think the idea of we've got to make his first feud be with arguably our most popular star on the show, is that maybe a commentary on the fact that they're not 100% confident or behind Braun Strowman as the champion in the first place, so they feel like in order to compensate for that, we probably should put him with a guy like the Fiend that's popular, that will draw eyes to the product, because otherwise we're not really sure who Strowman could draw with as champion, because he wasn't our plan to be the champion anyway.
It could be. It really could be. They have shown repeatedly that they don't have faith in Strowman with that championship, and yet they've shown repeatedly that they do have faith in Strowman as a draw. There are little signs of this, like when he opens the second hour of SmackDown. That's their way. Anyone they put in that position is there to keep eyes on the product, because they know people turn off at the beginning of the second hour. So they have shown faith in Braun Strowman. But I think we've mentioned a few times, there is a lack of depth at the top of SmackDown. And that's why they've been bringing in John Cena. That's why they've been bringing in Goldberg. Now without Roman Reigns, there aren't that many people left that Strowman can actually face, especially on the heel side. I mean, you've technically got Daniel Bryan, but he's a face and he's involved in something else. So there's not really that many opportunities. This, for me, really looks like they're trying to sort of revert back to what their plan was back in January, to put the title on Bray Wyatt again and then wait for Roman to be ready.
You mentioned that this kind of puts Braun in a little bit of a tough spot. Do you think that they're also making a mistake with Bray Wyatt, making him the heel in this feud? It felt like, especially coming out of WrestleMania, even though I guess maybe he was technically the heel in the match with John Cena because of the way that match was presented, he doesn't really come off as a guy, at least for me as a fan, he doesn't come off as a guy that I want to boo. He doesn't come off as a guy that I want to cheer against, because he does such cool things that you've never really seen before, like the Firefly Funhouse segments and the Firefly Funhouse match at WrestleMania. So do you think that they're making a wrong move here, not only with Strowman and the feud itself, but with trying to push Bray as the heel again against Strowman?
I would say it is probably the wrong move to present Bray Wyatt as the heel in this, but it's a mistake they've made repeatedly. They keep forgetting, traditionally, You make your heel by putting them against the top faces, and in many ways they've done that with Bray Wyatt. They put him against Finn Balor. They put him against Seth Rollins. They put him against Daniel Bryan. The Miz was in a face push at the time. John Cena. Goldberg was supposed to be the face in the feud. But what they keep forgetting is that an interesting character will always be popular. And if the crowd are cheering them, they're a face. Wyatt's been booked as a heel for every single feud so far, and it's only made him more popular. So I think storytelling-wise, it's the wrong move, but it's definitely helped fans get behind him, knowing that the company are trying to push him as the bad guy.
Who is it you think that just doesn't get it that the Fiend is not a heel?
It's hard to say for certain who gets it and who doesn't, but I know that the person really pushing these feuds and the idea that Bray Wyatt should be a heel is Vince McMahon. He wants Bray Wyatt to be the heel. He wants Bray Wyatt to be used to push faces. Unfortunately, you've now got this system whereby anybody that Bray Wyatt feuds with ends up switching from face to heel or heel to face, because you get that bizarro Raw after Mania feel from the guy. But Vince McMahon never really got the Raw after Mania either, so it does make sense.
Do you feel like in a lot of situations we've seen with the Fiend that maybe they've backed themselves into a corner here? Like, what I mean by that is, if this match goes down and Bray Wyatt doesn't win the title, then where do we go from there? Or vice versa, if Braun doesn't retain, he's supposed to be the newly minted champion. He just took out Goldberg at WrestleMania, and then if in his first title defense he loses, then what do we do with him going forward? Have they kind of booked themselves into a little bit of a corner here about one of these guys is going to be damaged goods coming out of this match regardless of which way they go?
I would say the only time they've really got this right is when the Fiend took on John Cena. Since then, and I don't want to say that they've built it completely wrong, because they haven't, but they keep positioning Bray Wyatt into a corner. With Finn Balor, you had the question, why isn't it the Demon King? With Seth Rollins, you had the whole thing about Hell in a Cell. And it just went from there to there. Goldberg obviously booked into a corner. They have been throwing the Fiend into everything, sort of last minute, as a way of saying, okay, this is the guy. This is the guy we want to put. Oh, wait, we don't want to push him. Okay, but he needs to win the title. Yeah, but he can't win the title. Yeah, but he definitely can't lose to Goldberg. Yeah, but he's lost to Goldberg. And now he's here against Braun Strowman. Both men need the momentum. Now, we could have a sort of dusty finish. We could have something similar to Hell in a Cell. And I think in an arena without a crowd, this is actually the perfect time for it. But I still would rather not have had this feud so early.
I think I've got to agree with you there. It's definitely something that has some backstory and has some legs. I'm just not sure if that was the right move to make with Braun's first feud. Maybe put him in there with the guys that he can get a good win over and kind of build himself up with, and then maybe save the Fiend for, kind of off in the distance a little bit, and then, make the fans want it. Make us have to wait for it, especially, as you mentioned, because of the uncertainty with Roman Reigns. Once this big feud is over, like I said, where do they? It feels like they only have. It's only downhill from here. There's no really where for them to go as far as upward trajectory. Like, this is the biggest feud they have to give us, and they're already giving it to us 1 month later. So after it's done, where do we go? Especially if a guy like Roman Reigns isn't ready to go.
I definitely agree with you there. It's a difficult situation, and it does seem like they're reverting to type. It may be because of a lack of top stars on SmackDown, but then just move someone over from Raw. But then who have you got? Like, if they'd moved, for example, Samoa Joe over, that for me would have been perfect. Braun Strowman versus Samoa Joe, great first feud. They could have made magic. But then, is Samoa Joe ready? There's a lot going on in the WWE right now, and there's a lot of people in corners.
Well, let's move over to the Raw side of things and talk about this past Monday's episode. We saw 3 competitors qualify for the Money in the Bank match, and those were Apollo Crews, Rey Mysterio, and Aleister Black. How surprised were you, if at all, with these results, as far as how we start to see the Money in the Bank match start to take shape, and the picks for the first 3 guys to officially qualify?
I would say 2 out of 3 were fairly clear to me. I didn't see Apollo Crews losing. MVP is doing good things right now. He's putting people over, and he's there when they need him. But Money in the Bank ladder match, probably not his cup of tea right now. Aleister Black, he's on the receiving end of a very strong push. He's doing very good things, and really, he's been a cornerstone of Raw since WrestleMania. And in fact, before, he's really being very important, showing what he can do and doing it long term, putting people over. The surprise for me was Rey Mysterio beating Buddy Murphy. Mm-hmm. That said, both men do have a lot to offer that match. So as surprised as I was, I can't say I was disappointed, and it was a very good match.
Yeah, that was a surprising result to me too. I mean, not that, Rey Mysterio isn't a name deserving of a Money in the Bank match, but he's got some mileage on those knees, and so I wasn't sure that, not only for his style, that, just like you said with MVP, that putting Rey Mysterio in a Money in the Bank ladder match would necessarily be something he would enjoy or want to be a part of at this stage in his career, and I thought it would have been a nice opportunity to give Murphy a little bit of a rub. He came up with Seth's group as the disciple, and I know because of the injury to one of the members of ALP that faction has kind of disintegrated a little bit, but he was still kind of moving his way up the ranks as, Seth Rollins' first follower. And so I really thought that this, especially with guys like Apollo Crews and Aleister Black, young guys that haven't really, broken through that ceiling quite yet, being in the match, I thought this would have been a perfect opportunity to give Murphy that same rub and, let Mysterio kind of do the favor for him and then maybe take some time off, until this whole COVID thing's over and fans get back in the arena and things like that.
It's a difficult one because we don't know anything that might be happening backstage as regards maybe Buddy Murphy didn't want to go up to the corporate headquarters as a possibility. There's obviously lots of things up in the air at the moment. I would have very much liked to see Buddy Murphy in that match. We know how much he has to offer. But at the same time, it didn't happen. And Buddy Murphy's one of those, and it feels strange to say this occasionally, I have faith in the WWE to work well with Buddy Murphy because they have already been working very well with Buddy Murphy. His time on 205 Live was great. Since his feud of Aleister Black, and then on that night he joined Seth Rollins, that's been great for him. And now we're seeing, as you say, this disintegration of this faction built around Seth Rollins. They didn't help each other. They didn't support each other. But Buddy Murphy made sure to still worship at the altar of Seth Rollins. That, for me, is interesting. It leaves a door open for Buddy Murphy to potentially get involved in Seth Rollins' championship match against Drew McIntyre, and hopefully, and I really am hopeful of this, hopefully start a feud between the two men.
Now, that would definitely be interesting. I think that would be a acceptable, maybe consolation prize that, if he's not going to get in the Money in the Bank match, hey, we're going to put you up against Seth Rollins for the next couple of months. I don't think that would be a bad trade-off.
No, not at all. And I know Seth Rollins is eager to get that feud started. That faction was not built as it was without Seth Rollins' permission. He was involved in the planning for that faction. He wanted everyone there to be there, and he very much wanted to work with Buddy Murphy. I can definitely see a lot of good matches between the two in future.
Now, Apollo Crews is a guy that is an interesting case to me. Here's a guy that he's been on the main roster a long time, probably longer than some people even realize. He was really one of the first original NXT call-ups when that kind of started becoming a thing. He had a lot of hype in NXT and was one of the first guys to come up to Raw when they started making those call-ups to the main roster. And he's already had some instances where it seemed like they were going to give him a push, and then they would back off, and then, they tried him in the tag team with Titus O'Neil, and then that kind of went away. And he's had a lot of start and stops, it seems like, in his career. He gets into the Money in the Bank match. Do you see this as an opportunity the WWE is giving him as kind of his last chance to, quote, get over, that if he can't do something with this opportunity that, this may be the last chance he gets to really get himself, give him that breakthrough moment and really cement himself into the the mid-card to upper mid-card of the Raw brand?
It's hard to say that it's going to be a last chance when I haven't really seen many chances to begin with. With Apollo Crews, I'm actually a little bit more familiar with him than a lot of people who are watching day to day. I was familiar with him when he went by the name UR Nation, which is a name he had when he was a champion of a local promotion about 20, 30 miles away from me. So I'm quite familiar with his work. And he has some very strong strengths and some very clear weaknesses. He's not used to being on the back foot. He's not the best seller, but his power game is great and his offense is different. And he really connects with a crowd when he's in the position where he can show that enthusiasm. What he's had so far is he was bullied by Sheamus. He was bullied by Dolph Ziggler with his mate Kalisto. I think that's it. That's really not much of anything. There's a few people who definitely wanted to see him pushed. Paul Heyman wanted to get hold of him on Raw. He got him. We saw a great match of Aleister Black. He's had a match of MVP now. So while I don't think this is necessarily a last chance, this may be his best chance.
Let's talk about the Money in the Bank match itself. We've seen that it be announced that it's not going to be a Money in the Bank match like we have seen in the past. It's going to be at the top of WWE headquarters, and we've heard that it's actually going to be a situation where the competitors are going to have to fight from the ground floor up to the roof, which is where the ring and the ladders will be, and then get up to the briefcase. There's actually been pictures leaked on social media of what that setup on the roof looks like. We've even heard that they already have content for Money in the Bank already shot and in the can. I don't think the Money in the Bank match itself is one of those, but they do have some content for the pay-per-view already ready to go. Each era in wrestling seems to have a name attached to it. We've had the Attitude Era. We had the Ruthless Aggression Era. A lot of people refer to the era that we're in now as the Reality Era, with people like Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey, even going back to, when CM Punk dropped his first pipe bomb. Are we starting to enter the cinematic era where we're going to see more and more of these blow-off matches and the culminations of feuds shot as, mini movies as opposed to just a standard match in a ring in an arena? Is this something we're going to see more of, especially coming out of WrestleMania with the Boneyard and Funhouse matches?
Definitely, yes. There is a lot of good feeling about the matches at WrestleMania. Particularly the response to the Boneyard match on social media, better or not to the match is not really worth questioning because the Boneyard match came first. So it got a groundswell of support for being that different and unique before we then got to the Firefly Funhouse match. So they loved what they got from the response. They want to capture that lightning in a bottle again. This is a way that they have decided to do that. So we're likely to see that again in future. It's also a way they can handle the fact that, I've talked about this on my YouTube. When it comes to Money in the Bank, they would have to have so many people in an arena for that event, and it's too many people. It is too large a gathering for the state to allow, even though they are now essential media, so we'll see what happens with that one. But they have already recorded the Money in the Bank matches. They have been sort of in and out when it comes to it, so you'd have a selection of people there, and they will be told, okay, you and you come and do this spot, you come and do this spot, we need you, you and you, all of you, take a seat, chill out, we'll call you when you need you. So they spent basically an entire day planning it out, doing their spots, taking their bumps. It got quite late and it got quite dark, so just trying to stay warm. And as it were, just essentially putting the match together, and now it's gone away to be edited. There may be some reshoots, but they did a few pickups there at the time, like extra shots that they may not use. So we're definitely going into a sort of cinematic era. We're definitely going to see more as we go, but at the same time, if we didn't have what's going on right now, they would probably sweep all this under the carpet as quickly as possible.
So you don't think this is something that we're going to see more of once live shows and fans are being allowed back into the arenas? You think this is strictly something we're going to see because of the COVID pandemic, and once we kind of get back to normal, you don't think we'll see many more of these cinematic type matches?
I don't think we'll see many more, but to be fair, previous to this, we had the Ultimate Deletion,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was it. So anything is more. So we'll probably see more, but we definitely won't see many. They want to get back into in-ring storytelling. They want to get back to business as usual as soon as possible. So right now, post-COVID, there are no plans to do more matches like this.
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the way that they're shooting these matches. Sounds very much like a mini movie, where they'll film a little part and then stop and then bring some other people in and back and forth and then kind of piece it all together, later on in post-production. Have you talked to or gotten any feedback from any wrestlers about how they feel about this strategy? Like what it's like to, like you said, they may have two guys say, okay, we need you guys to climb up this ladder, fight for a little bit, and then you're going to powerbomb the other guy through a table, and then we're going to yell cut, and then everybody's going to go back to their places, and we're going to reset and then continue from there. Have you gotten any feedback from anybody in the business as far as how they feel about, like I said, basically shooting a movie as opposed to just having a match? There are no stops and starts. It's just having a normal match like they normally would in front of a crowd, as opposed to, kind of what they're going through right now with these, cinematic matches.
They tried to give it as much flow as possible and film it as in order as possible, but then at times they would have multiple crews filming, so on one floor you'd be recording one thing, on another floor you'd be recording another thing. So you'd have people going upstairs, downstairs, trying to get all the spots right. It's different. A lot of wrestlers really aren't used to that element of acting, so it takes them out of their comfort zone, but at the same time, it does enhance the safety. And a lot of people are very excited to do something like this, knowing how popular those matches at WrestleMania were. A lot of people want a slice of that pie.
Last thing I want to talk about with Raw is Zelina Vega has been all over the shows lately. I've seen a lot of people on social media calling her the MVP of Raw right now. She's got herself a faction of heels. She's got Andrade, and she's got Garza, and she's got Austin Theory. And we've seen them involved with Drew McIntyre and kind of going into different facets of the show. We've seen them with matches with the Street Profits, Bianca Belair getting involved. Is Zelina Vega really kind of becoming a throwback where even though she's a manager of the group, she's really the biggest heel of her faction, and then the other guys just kind of benefit from having her as a manager and getting put into prime spots because of how good of a job she's doing, as opposed to the other way around where the wrestlers are making the manager?
I would absolutely say so. When it comes to heels in that group, as big a heel as Andrade is, Zelina Vega is the one doing all the talking, and it's when they talk that a heel really does their best work. Zelina Vega is doing all of the talking. And I want to say something just as an aside for this group. The amount of luck that they have had, and this is in some really dark ways. So it's not necessarily good luck, but it's luck nonetheless. The only plan for Zelina Vega was to have her continue managing Andrade. There was no plan for a faction. Then Andrade had to take his time off, and Angel Garza was called up for that purpose, to fill that slot. The idea then was he would go back down to NXT. Well, he didn't. He did extremely well. He really got over. And Zelina Vega really pushed for him to stay, and Andrade really pushed for him to stay. And then Andrade wasn't available again. So Austin Theory started getting involved. And now, because there are so many people who aren't involved and who are taking time off, or who have dropped out, or who have chosen not to be at the shows, this faction have become the most important thing possible. They are in multiple segments. Zelina Vega was in 6 different segments on this week's Raw, representing different people. They're not winning many matches, got to say that first and foremost. But winning matches does not make a star anymore. TV time. They are represented multiple times every week. They need to seize this opportunity, and they are doing a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's probably not the way that they would have wanted it to come about, but especially when you're having to shoot on a closed set and only a certain amount of people are available at a time. I mean, when you've got a heel faction like that, you've got 4 people and say, hey, we can get 6 or 7 segments and matches out of the combination of these 4 people. I mean, they just, like you said, just kind of found themselves in a really prime position, especially guys like Garza. And Austin Theory has only been on Raw, 4 weeks? I mean, he came up like right before WrestleMania, then found himself on WrestleMania, and then here he is. I mean, he just walked right up to the main roster into a main event spot.
Pretty much. And you can see Drew McIntyre actually really enjoys working with him. It's the silly little things that really get you connected with people. And that is someone going places.
I want to talk about a few stories outside of the ring. First, let's talk about, it was reported this week that somebody contacted the Orange County Board of County Commissioners in Florida, purporting to be a WWE employee named John. They made claims that WWE employees are being forced to work and are fearing for their jobs. They're fearful of their working conditions. And he was asking the Orange County Board of Commissioners to make wrestling non-essential. What can you tell us about this story, about this, unnamed, I guess, WWE employee? Is it actually a WWE employee? What can you tell us about this situation?
I've been reaching out since pretty much the moment I found out about this. And it, as you might expect, it's been extremely difficult to get anyone to go on the record and say one way or the other. What I have been told by a number of different people is that this is a WWE employee, but it isn't someone who's actually wrestling. So it's someone potentially back of house, someone at the head office. It could be so many different people, and I don't know who it is, but I have been told by multiple people they do work for the WWE, they're not a wrestler. And we have seen so many people let go in that back of house. Aiden English, as he was formerly known, said openly hundreds of people were let go. So this is someone who legitimately feels that if they speak up, they will lose their job. And they've seen people that they know and work with lose their job. So this is an extreme way to do things, but I kind of understand where they're coming from.
Are the WWE forcing people to work, against their will, or, maybe even if they don't feel safe coming into work because of the COVID situation? Is there any truth to that claim?
We've seen a lot of examples of the WWE being in positions where they could potentially try and force people to work. Everything with Saudi Arabia, anyone who says they don't want to work in Saudi Arabia is permitted not to work in Saudi Arabia. The same is true here. You look what happened with Roman Reigns. You look at Rey Mysterio taking time off. You look at Dana Brooke taking time off. People have been allowed to take time off. People have been allowed to say, no, I'm not coming in. But as with anything in the WWE, it is at the expense of a potential push. You cannot be pushed if you're not there.
Another interesting piece of material made its way onto Twitter this week. It was reportedly a picture of a mock-up of attire for a character change for the Revival. Now, of course, the Revival a couple weeks ago asked and were granted their release. And if you haven't seen this picture on Twitter, I'm not really sure I can explain it. The mock-up was for a definite character change. Looked like it was going to be more of a comedy character for the two. I think one of the mock-ups even showed one wearing almost like a Flavor Flav type clock or medallion around their neck. It was brightly colored attire, definitely a departure from the Revival that we had come to know and see on television. Of course, like we said, they asked for their release. They were granted it. They're now no longer part of the WWE. First, I just want to ask you, can you verify that this was a legit report, that these mock-ups that we're seeing on Twitter were actual ideas that were going to be presented to the Revival for a change in direction and a change in character for them?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to say I'm glad you attempted to describe the pictures, because I would have had no chance whatsoever. As to this report, I did some digging immediately after hearing about it, and I can 100% confirm that the Revival were shown these images or mock-ups similar to these as a future direction for their characters.
My gosh.
Mm-hmm.
But was this the last straw before they wanted out of their contracts? I mean, what is the situation? Was like, hey, we'll hear you out. What ideas do you have for us? They were shown these ridiculous pictures and then said, okay, we'd like our release, please.
By the time they were shown these pictures, they had long decided to go. And honestly, from what I've been told, they found it as funny as we do.
I mean, was this a legit attempt? Was this something where the WWE knew they were gone, so they were like, let's just throw something at them as a rib and just see what they say? I mean, just the question of why just keeps popping into my head. Like I said, if you haven't seen these pictures, please go look them up and just imagine what the Revival would look like in these get-ups. But just why would you do this to these guys? Like, is this the best you could come up with? And if they're guys that you're wanting to keep, and reportedly you were offering $1 million a year each for them to stay, and then this is what you present them with, hey, if you stay, look what we've got for you. I just don't understand it.
At this point, it was around the time of the last offer, and I think, as you say, they had just sort of given up and were throwing anything at them. Maybe the writers were having fun. Hard to say, but this is a WWE. Steve Austin got offered the name of Fang McFrost. People juggle geese. The world's gone mad.
I think maybe juggling geese may have even been part of that gimmick that they proposed to him. If you look at those outfits, that may have been something that was proposed to him.
Yeah, that's the one thing they deleted from the picture. Just a picture of a goose just wandering past in the background.
Last thing we'll talk about tonight is Rob Gronkowski. And if you have forgotten, he is the current 24/7 champion. He was also the host of WrestleMania, which is where he won the 24/7 championship. But if you don't keep up with sports, he actually is returning to the NFL. He had been retired, which is how he was then doing things outside of the NFL, got hooked up with the WWE, etc. But his old buddy Tom Brady is now the quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he wanted to go join them. And so he was actually traded just yesterday to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he will be resuming his NFL playing career in Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. Obviously, this leaves the WWE in a little bit of a lurch. Like I said, he is their current 24/7 champion. He has now, started paperwork to sign a contract with the Buccaneers and get reinstatement into the NFL. Were the WWE aware that he even had thoughts of even possibly returning to the NFL this year, or before they made him the host of WrestleMania and gave him the title and all this? Or was this a complete shock to them as it was to most sports fans yesterday?
It wasn't as complete a shock, but they still were not aware that he was planning to do this. And I've got to say, there were some people high up in WWE who were not happy to hear that this was happening. They had plans for Gronk. They were writing things up. They were preparing things. And now they have to have a whole raft of conversations with him about what he can do, what he can't do going forwards.
Are there any possible contractual ramifications for him, as far as maybe money owed back to the WWE if he, basically just bails out on him and says, hey, I'm going back to the NFL? Will he have to give back some of his, signing bonus or maybe guaranteed money? I don't know how the contracts work in WWE, but it would feel like this is not going to be just an easy, clean break for him to say, hey, WWE, thanks for the gig, but I changed my mind. I'm going back to the NFL.
It's hard to say without seeing the contract. There may be some guaranteed income. There may be a release clause. There may literally be something they had written in there that says the contract is null and void if I go back to football. Everyone's contract is different and everyone's lawyers work differently, but I think it's worth pointing out that WWE wrestlers are independent contractors rather than employees, so technically he's legally entitled to seek other employment as much as he wants. And to be fair, as much as his playing career will be enhanced by having the 24/7 championship, I get the feeling that's going to be pulled off him as soon as possible.
I would love if there was a way that he could hold on to the 24/7 championship until the NFL season starts. And let's assume the NFL season starts on time. So we're talking late August, early September. And in pre-games, Gronk's out there warming up in before a legit NFL game, and R-Truth or somebody hops out of the crowd and goes and rolls him up with a schoolboy in the end zone during pregame warm-ups and wins the 24/7 championship. I think that would be a win-win for all parties involved.
I would love it if they sort of did it legitimately in the middle of an actual football match. Anytime he gets tackled, he could be pinned for a count of 3. And I would love to spend time just watching a full game and working out by the end of it who actually is the 24/7 champion. Because if you'll remember, there is somebody who sat and worked out logically who technically has custody of Dominic Mysterio.
This is true.
And to my knowledge, it's Roman Reigns.
This is true. I would
surprising no one.
I would love if just at the end of a game, Roman Reigns has custody of Dominic, and some random defensive lineman for the New York Jets is the 24/7 champion because he technically laid on top of Gronk during a game for longer than 3 seconds. So he is actually the 24/7 champion.
Doesn't even have to be Gronk. Gronk could lose it to someone who could lose it to someone who could lose it to someone who could lose it to someone. And before you know it, it's gone from Tampa to Ontario, Canada. Just nobody will ever know where the belt is anymore.
I did see on Twitter, did you happen to see that No Way Jose had replied to a tweet talking about him being traded? He basically said, so there's a roster spot open, ... I thought that was, pretty good humor, especially considering, it hasn't even been a week yet since he was released, but it was good to see him in good spirits and kind of playing around with, with the whole scenario.
Yeah, I'm glad so many of the people who've been released have been in good humor. Obviously, it could be a very difficult time for a lot of them. It's been rough, but anyone I've spoken to, they've been really positive about it. They've been quite excited about what's going to come next. But to be fair, the WWE may have just found a whole lot of money.
Yeah, that was the other thought that popped in my mind is, this is all in good fun, but actually he kind of has a point. If they're not having to pay Gronk, they may be able to open up 2 or 3 roster spots.
Yeah, maybe more than 2 or 3, let's be fair.
Well, yeah, true.
Yeah.
Well, let's end the show with a couple of fan questions. As always, we asked you on Twitter if you wanted to get involved with the show or if you had a question for Tom or I to tweet us using the hashtag Dropkick DiSKussions, and we try to get to as many as we can during the podcast. And we've got a couple for you this week. So, Tom, I'm just going to kind of shoot them at you rapid fire. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Noob and Company 1991 wants to know, what are your thoughts on Asuka's current position on Raw?
I think she's going to do really good in Money in the Bank. I think Becky Lynch really did a lot to bring Asuka back to prominence. And even though she's not necessarily been winning many tag matches, it's been Kairi Sane, unfortunately, who's been losing the matches for her. Asuka's really been revived. And I think the Raw side of the Women's Money in the Bank is looking incredible. Nia Jax, Asuka, Shayna Baszler, all 3 women are going to come out of this looking great.
At Wrestling in Vain, he likes to look ahead a little bit. He asked us, is it the right time for Becky Lynch to move aside and have Nia Jax have her moment on Raw and Tamina on SmackDown to have a sister versus sister match at Survivor Series?
We'll have to point out that they're not actually sisters before we move on there.
They're all family. Hey, let's not point out semantics.
Fair enough. Nia Jax, I think, would make a very good next Raw Women's Champion. I think she'd be the correct one to dethrone Becky Lynch at this point. I think he's got a definite good point there because they have so much history and because Nia Jax is such a tremendous heel. There's really very few heels of that level in the women's division. And Nia Jax, people hate her. I mean, people hate her. Mostly for breaking Becky Lynch's face, admittedly, but,
well,
there's work involved in that.
I was going to say, as an aside to that, did you see her match?
Yeah,
she may have a little bit of ring rust to work off. It may not even be ring rust. It's almost starting to become a pattern, but Man, that was a scary looking spot that she had this past Monday.
Yeah, that buckle bomb and Kyrie landed head first. Can we be gentle with Kyrie Sane? Like, can we all just agree to be gentle? If I was wrestling Kyrie Sane, I'd just let her win. She is too pure for this world. Do not hurt Kyrie Sane. Anyway, when it comes to Tamina, I'm not sure she's the plan, and I think Survivor Series is about 6 months away. It's a long time to sort of have no plan in between. So while I think Nia Jax is probably a very good shout, Tamina, maybe not. Survivor Series would have to see, because you also have to factor in NXT now, of course.
Speaking of NXT, we got a question from @xrob. He said, what are your thoughts on Finn Balor possibly winning the NXT UK Championship from Walter later in the year?
I had a theory on this, that what we would see would be a takeover that would have happened at WrestleMania. Finn Balor would win the championship from Walter, and then at takeover NXT Dublin, he would lose it back. Essentially putting over the American NXT and then putting over the UK NXT. Now, I'm not sure how the fans would have felt about that, given that it would have been in Dublin and Finn Balor would undoubtedly have been very popular against Walter. But there could have been ways that they could have done that. I would be very excited to see Finn Balor win that championship, but he has been so important to NXT since it went live. He has been such a key figure that if he did go to NXT UK, it would have to be for a very brief tenure. That said, NXT UK pre-records, so he could record a lot there and then just fly back. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I think if you watch NXT this week, it looked like Balor was on his way into a feud with Velveteen Dream, but to your point, because they're pre-recorded, I think he could pull off he could have his American feud, with Velveteen Dream, and then also make some trips over to NXT UK and kind of pull double duty for a little bit. I think that would be a pretty interesting situation to see. Almost kind of like the Bret Hart angle. He may be a face in the UK and a heel in America.
Yeah, very true. There's a lot of people who have that element to them. Now, if WWE ever succeeded in turning Becky Lynch heel, which, let's face it, they won't, they would probably be able to turn her back face again just for UK-based shows, even though she's from the Republic of Ireland and thus not actually from the UK.
Well, we thank everyone again for listening this week. I had a lot of fun on this week's show. Like I said, it was nice to let it breathe a little bit and just talk some wrestling and not have to be talking about so much of the negative that's been going on lately. So I hope that you guys listening also enjoyed this week's podcast. Please be sure to like or comment on this week's video and subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. Make sure that you're also subscribing to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well. He posts all kinds of videos up there talking about other wrestling news and notes and things that we don't necessarily have a chance to get to here on the show. You can follow Tom on Twitter @Colohue, and I'm @Korey Gunz if you'd like to give me a follow. And check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We thank you for joining us again, and we will see you next week on Dropkick DiSKussions.